So I'm Rachel Burns.
And I'm Brad Burns.
And we are the Burns family. We have 6 children. We have our one that's been in our family the longest, Lincoln, is 8. We adopted him through Heart and Soul Adoptions when he was 3 days old. We brought him home from the hospital. So he has been with us the longest. And then when he was 8 months old, we finalized his adoption, and a week later we found out we were pregnant with Jillian. And that was a fun surprise. And then when she was 8 months old, I went in to have surgery and found out I was pregnant with Tyson. And that was a little more than a fun surprise. So we ended up with those 3. And then when Tyson was about a year old, we had a neighbor kind of just drop this baby off at our house who was he 2 or 3?
He was 2.
He was 2. But that was when we kind of just started getting more involved in foster care. They are 18, 17, and 14. And they are refugees from Rwanda, Africa. They're the best kids ever, so our opinion of teenagers and foster care is probably slightly skewed based on them just being amazing kids. And they are super fun and super great.
Fit right in with our family. Do everything with us, play with us. Have a lot of fun.
My name is Laura Hamilton. I am Rulan's mom. My husband Daniel and I have 2 children adopted through Utah Foster Care and 3 biological children. And this is my son Rulan.
I am Rulan Hamilton, formerly known as Rulan Steed. I was in this religion called FLDS, they're kind of a cult Mormon thing, and they still teach plural marriage, and ever since I was about 14, I've always had this burning desire to get away, really, and so I finally had the chance, so I did, through Holding Out Help. They're the people that helped me run. So that's when I ran from Cedar City here, got a ride, they helped me up here, and my biological mother came up here and tried to convince me to go back along with my brother, and I made a big mistake and let him come see the house I was staying at, so they reported me as a runaway, and the cops showed up and took me into DT for a while, and then I was in this boys group home, and then finally my judge put me with the Hamiltons, where I've been ever since.
My name is Suzanne Gardner Stott, and I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I am a retired adoption professional, foster parent. I typically tell people I have 10 children, but I really only adopted 9 of them. The 10th child was a foster child in the DCFS system in Utah, and we became very, very close to her. She was a refugee, and her parents still live here, but couldn't handle her because she broke so many of their traditions and mores and became quite wild. And so I took her as a foster child, and now she is like a daughter to me, even though she still has very close contact with her birth family. My former husband and I, had been married 9 years and had been unable to have children. We found out due to a medical condition on his part. And so when he finished law school, we immediately began applying to adopt and had to make the decision whether to go through a local agency or through Holt International and adopt from Korea. And in our hearts, we just felt like Korea was the better fit for us. And after we adopted from Korea, we began attending NACAC, which we had never heard of, which is the North American Council on Adoptable Children. And that, the first one we attended in 1979 or 80, was actually very mind-blowing. We had no idea there were that many children in foster care. And so because of that, with 2 other couples, we started Wednesday's Child, which is the organization that tries to recruit families for children in the system. And I personally answered that phone in my home for about 6 years and then began, there was no computer then, taking the books of waiting children into my home, and families would come and look at them. And in the meantime, we began finding children in those books that were in foster care and adopting them. And eventually, we began for the LDS Family Services and for Utah DCFS taking foster children.
So when we became licensed to do foster care, one of the questions they ask you is, what age range of kids would you be willing to take? And ours was fairly narrow. Ours was like 5 to 10. And so I was not very prone to even want to consider taking a teenager. We already had a teenage boy about the same age, and that was not something that was very attractive to me at the time. But my husband said, we should go and meet him. Let's at least go and meet him. And so we actually went and met with Rue in the group home. The whole family went, because it was important to us that everybody have buy-off on this if we were going to bring him into our home, especially given that we had, at the time, a 7-year-old foster daughter in our home. It was like, we're bringing in this 15-year-old boy who's from a community that's known for being very abusive and sexually abusive, and I mean, it was red flags everywhere. But once we met him, it was just, he was a part of the family immediately almost. Took him longer to realize it, but
Yeah, I definitely had a longer time, I guess you could say, connecting, as far as, like, I wasn't like, oh, I'm a part of this family now, let's be one happy family, like, right away. It took me longer, but it's gotten way better than over the past year. It has gotten, I mean, I've done a lot, I've changed so much over the past year, and now we are one big happy family.
learning how to read a teenager in that way has been interesting. So, we do pretty good with each other though, huh?
It's alright.
It's aight.
When we first signed up with DCFS, that was like, we had 3 very young children. We had a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and we were like, no more littles. And we very specifically said we want teenagers, and surprisingly we got littles. And so I was like, it was kind of odd because we kept saying, I think teenage girls are 10-year-old girl would fit in really well here. And I always, in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, oh, they just think I want a babysitter. Which was not the case, but it would have been nice, but no. But we never actually had really teenagers through DCFS other than respite care, so it was kind of shocking.
Oh, I definitely think they're afraid of their own children being impacted by the negative behaviors. My experience in having different foster children in my home and having them show up at church and say the F word or be wearing a tank top or have tattoos or have studs or whatever, that was quite alarming to a lot of people. And so I think, number one, foster parents need to just learn to mellow out a little bit, live with the ambiguity that everything doesn't really fit, that you can still consider yourself a good church member, but have kids that don't, go to R-rated movies and that play violent video games. And I just think you have to learn to adapt and also be aware of the needs of your family. So you're walking on eggs a lot of the time. But I think you can really do it. I think in the end you have to say it's more important that this child feel a sense of belonging and that no matter what they do, they're going to be with us, than worry about what they might say at church or how they're going to offend someone, which I know my kids did a lot. And when my first child went off to prison, and then when he came back, he was covered in tattoos and came to church. It was really good for people to have to realize what they really believed and to welcome him or not welcome him.
Someone who's so close to being an adult and trying in such a very short period of time to make an impact on their life and to help them, and really a lot of concern about how that disrupts the family, how that disrupts potentially marriage, how it disrupts work life. I mean, there's so many things that it could potentially be disruptive for. And it's fear. I mean, that's what it was for us. Getting out of your comfort zone. And it's uncomfortable. And I didn't originally want to do it, but my life would not be what it is had we not.
Well, DT was hell itself. DT was not fun at all. I was only in there for 5 days, and it felt like a month. I mean, there was lots of fights going on. Just in the 5 days I was there was like 3 fights, and I mean, it's bad. But the group home was almost worse in its own way. I mean, there wasn't as many rules, but yeah, all the boys there, like you say, have been like treated like criminals basically, and they're there just because they have to be. So they are, I mean, there's staff there, but there's nobody to keep them in order really, so it can go chaotic, and it was really bad. I mean, they're so the boys there, and even some of the staff, they're so, how do I put this? Like they'll try to get your story out of you, like while you're in there or whatever, and then they'll just totally turn against you and mock you about it and go telling everybody. And I mean, that's what probably got me the most, is when like some of the kids there would really, ask me a lot about my story, and so I told them, and then they would go, and just tell everybody about everything I told them, and then they'd laugh about it and everything. But so the boys group home was not my favorite memories.
So his case was complicated because, so Rue was in state custody in Texas, and then he was in state custody in Idaho, and then was sent to work for the community he lived in. And he ran while he was working. And so for a period of about 2 years, he really didn't have a home. He didn't have like a constant place he would go home to each night. And so when he was reported as a runaway, the police came out and they spoke with his biological mom and asked her, what do you want us to do? And she requested that he be arrested. And so that's why he was sent to DT. We stepped up and said that we would take him as a placement. And I think if we hadn't been there for that court date, he probably would have been sent back to Arizona, because they don't really have the capacity in the group homes for the kids who need the help and the services. So my impression was that if we hadn't stepped in and said, we'll take him as a placement, that they would have sent him back.
The last child I adopted was 18 when we finalized the adoption, and I got him at 16. And but remember, by that time, I had had a lot of experience, not only with my own children, and sometimes I have a very mentally challenged child, and I have a child with deformed arms, I have a child with cerebral palsy, I have a child with fetal alcohol syndrome, and another child who came into my home at age 10 who'd been sexually abused. So I can say that his behaviors didn't scare me. Let's just put it that way. And you have to remember, if you're a wise adoptive parent, which I always haven't been, I became a single mother in the middle of all this. And so when we adopted this last teenager, it was a family decision. You never go into these things alone without the aid of your children that are already in the home. So when he came into the home, and he'd been living in group homes since he was 4, so that was 10 years of living in state mental hospitals and group homes. But I found that the greatest asset to helping me was my own children. A classic example is that his therapist at the primary children's hospital psych unit said, "Oh, you will have a lot of trouble with him at mealtime. He will chew and just annoy the heck out of you by the way he chews to get attention." Well, he did that the first meal, and it was my children that said, "Hey, knock it off," or, poked him. And so my children were the allies. So whenever he escalated, because he has a real anger management problem and his diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenic, whenever he escalated, for the first year, it was my children, who were his same age, some of them, that took him aside and said, "Hey, buddy, we've all been in foster care. We know what you're going through. We know this is tough, blah, 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 blah." And they helped him with the racial issues and all that. So generally, I can't say I was scared. I will say that my biggest mistake is that I would escalate sometimes and start acting more like the child than the parent, and knee-jerk some of his violence. And I look back now and think, oh, if I'd have just been more calm with him and used more humor, we would have had a much better outcome sometimes when the police had to be called. I guess my thing is adoption. When I decided to adopt him, after we'd had him in the home just a few months, we realized we could never let him go. But I realized this was going to be a lifelong journey because his problems were lifelong, just like mine are. But we'll work them out together.
It's easy to understand a lot of people have fears of having older kids in their home. Everyone's situation is different.
True.
But, and so, we at one point were a little bit fearful of having older kids and younger kids all in the same home. But we were able to come up with a safety plan to begin with on, to address some of the fears that we had and put measures in place to make sure that we kept our family safe. And from that point, we really found out that what we had feared and what preconceptions we had were completely different than our experience.
I actually heard about Empower to Connect before we got Natalia as a placement. And I went to Washington and got trained myself in the program at one of the big in-person events that they do. And it really is a program where TCU, Karen Purvis, as infants and children and even babies who are not born yet, experience trauma, and then how you have to connect differently with these kids, and how the shame that they've already experienced in their life is like expanded tenfold by parenting in a traditional way. And so it just really resonated with me. And so I came home and I started to try some of the things with Natalia, and it was beautiful. Like the things that she started to open up and talk about was amazing. We were on the way to a therapy appointment one day, and she just, the reflective questions that they teach you to ask and all of that, like she just started spilling all of this stuff. And I got to the therapy appointment, and I pulled her therapist aside, and I'm like, I have to tell you everything she just told me and shared with me. Like it was beautiful. We had started to use the tools with Rue, and I really we wouldn't have the relationship we have without the tools that we were given in knowing when to push, when not to push, when to, using a time in instead of a time out, offering an opportunity to try something again without the shame, without the guilt. Just, it makes a huge difference in how the kids respond. And the change in our biological kids, when we don't get frustrated and remember to use it, is amazing as well. I think we have much better relationships with all of our kids now than we've ever had.
everybody knows these now. I started out being quite ignorant of many things, but everybody knows now that you have to get to know and read the file of the child coming into your home. Obviously, if a child is sexually active, you don't want him downstairs sleeping by your teenage daughter's bedroom. Nor maybe you wouldn't even consider taking a child like that. It depends on your teenage daughter and how strong she is. So you have to assess the strengths and the weaknesses of the family. And do a lot of reading and take all the training you can through the Utah Foster Association and all of the training that you can get by these fabulous people that have written all these great books. I could name lists and lists, and then I would say develop a really nice relationship with your caseworker. If you feel like your caseworker is in your corner of the ring, then you're going to have a really successful experience. But mainly just face your fears, because these aren't scary people, they're just people that have maybe another set of problems that's a little different than what you've encountered. But the great thing about teenagers is they bring such a fun perspective into this the family equation. I just think, you don't have to change diapers, you don't have to work with them on teaching them how to pronounce words or read. Well, sometimes you do. That's wrong. Sometimes you do. But generally, they just bring such great personalities and such background, and getting them to talk about their backgrounds and how they ended up in foster care and their feelings for their birth families. So, number one, feel the fear and do it anyway, and then get prepared. Because if you're prepared, you're really not afraid. You've got backup from your caseworker, you've got respite care, you've got counseling. I mean, things are provided for you, all these tools to have success. And the other thing I would say is just, in our society, I think we're all too neurotic, and we're just all to make ourselves crazy. And I would say just relax a little bit about all those things. That's certainly what I've learned. And again, use a lot of humor and use a lot of human touch, and then do your homework. And I think you'll have a fabulous experience.
When he was in Idaho, he was actually there. He was sent to a repentance home. And we've talked with him many times and said, why were you sent to repent? What did you do? He has no idea. He has no idea what he did to be sent away from everyone that he knew, from his family, from his biological mother, from all of the people who he loved and loved him and he cared about. He doesn't know.
I was just a bad kid, I guess. Just not good enough.
So then to be sent into a system that perpetuates those thoughts and that puts the blame on the child who is not the one making the bad decisions. It's difficult. It's a lot to get past.
When I first left, then I did think everything was my fault, and I was just all messed up because that's who I was and that's who I'm going to be for the rest of my life. Is I'm going to be this weird play kid that is always going to have this bad story to tell, and I just figured that the less people I tell, the better off I'd be, because then they wouldn't think I was such a freak and everything. But now I've gotten to a point to where I realize that most of it was drilled into my head through the way that they taught kids, the way that they teach and train people, so that I just try to get most of it out of my head. And it's really hard for me because I try to balance everything out, say, is this me being normal, or is this me being basing it off what I would have been taught my whole life? But
Every new situation that comes up, we have to kind of go through the whole process again. And that's what I've learned as his mom, is that anything he hasn't experienced before, we have to go through that process again before he gets to the point of understanding that there is no shame. It's not him. It's not his fault. it's, and what is normal and what is, what feelings are things that anybody would feel, and what feelings are things that maybe is because of how he was taught as a young child. And so, but it is everything new. And so it's this cycle that we go through on a regular basis. Dating was one that was really difficult, because it's almost like you go back to day one and you have to teach everything over again. And there's a lot of doubt. Like there's a lot of, we talk through it, and then he'll go and he'll work with his therapist. And when his therapist tells him the same thing that I told him, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, well maybe mom's not just telling me this to make me feel good. Like maybe there really is something to it. But it takes, and that's not your fault, but it takes multiple people reinforcing it for him, because he's had so many people in his life who have taught him differently, and even at times a system that's taught him differently, that it's an undertaking.
I think a good example, something that would be in most people's mind would never be his fault. He has a bicycle, and him and I were working on his bike, and we got it fixed. And I asked him if I could take it for a spin. So I took it out and I rode it around the cul-de-sac right out here. I'm 41 years old, so I'm not young anymore. And Rue says, "Dad, do a wheelie." So I tried a wheelie, and it didn't go too well. I broke my ankle and I broke my leg, and I'm not meant to do wheelies. And because he said, "Dad, do a wheelie," even though I chose to do it and it was all on me, he felt responsible for my broken ankle.
Still does. That's when he's still processing through.
Where it had nothing to do with him, it was my choice to act like a teenager.
I still said it. I was like, I do.
Just, little things like that, something that to Dawson, he would have never claimed responsibility for that.
He would have felt bad, but he never would have taken on the accountability for it. And I think that's it. It's not just responsibility, it's accountability. Like, he feels accountable for what happened, which I think in a lot of ways holds a deeper trigger or shame than accountability does. Or than responsibility does, sorry.
Well, if I hadn't have planted the idea in his head, he wouldn't have done it in the first place. So it's like, I don't know, if I had just kept my big flappy tongue
It's
shut.
not necessarily true either.
I don't know.
Because success is so relative. I remember at age 10, my son without arms learned to tie a shoe. And to me, that was success. My family's been unusual because I was an adoption worker, so they are used to having, always growing up, a child here that had come in to be placed. We hosted the Wednesday's Child Children for years, and I ended up adopting 2 of those children that we hosted. And so they are used to having children that didn't quite fit the mold, whatever that is now. I mean, they say normal is a setting on a washing machine, and that's kind of what we talk about. What does normal mean? But my kids were used to seeing kids come and go, and so I think they valued the family unit. And so as kids came into our family, that the ones that had been adopted first agreed to take, there was really a sense of, wow, my mom took me and worked through my problems, now I'm going to help work through these problems. And most of my children have birth parents that we've tried to connect to if we didn't know who they were, or we've tried to connect to and made them part of our lives. In other words, I've done whatever I could do to fill in the puzzle pieces of my kids' lives. And the racial component has been a big, big deal, and I've been very active and involved in that. If they needed therapy, I've tried to do that. If they've needed job training, I've tried to do that. And we've always had I shouldn't say always, we tried to have a weekly planning meeting where we addressed what the most crucial needs of the time were.
If you don't know someone that's really been through it, then all the fear that they have is, it's not based on anything. It's just fear of the unknown. And so, network, get to know people that are doing it, get to know people that are going through it, address what fears you have, write them down, and find out, plan, something that you can do to overcome those fears. Because these kids really need that support system. They need your help. They need someone that trusts them and wants them to help them out. And a lot of kids are ready, really good kids, and want to make the right choices and are making the right choices in a lot of cases, and they just need that help to help them be a little bit better than they are.
Yeah, I would say just the same thing, network, and like a safety plan is not that difficult. You know where your kids are, right? Like, just keep an eye on your kids. But yeah, like, make some rules that are your household rules and stick to them. One of our big ones is that nobody goes in each other's rooms. So no kids, regardless for any reason, should be in anyone else's room. And like, no phones downstairs, no phones upstairs, no phones in rooms, only in the regular household area. And network, get to know people, and the more you get to know people, the more you talk, the more you understand.
Now that we've experienced having Rue as a part of our family and bringing him into our home as a foster child, like, it's much less scary. It's been an amazing experience. It's been the hardest thing we've ever done, but it's been one of the best things we've ever done. And to see at the age of 15, and now he's turning 17 in a week, to see the growth over that period of time, and to see there is still so much that you can do as a parent to help and support these kids even in those later years, and that it's a huge impact that he's going to carry with him for the rest of his life. And that even though he came to our family at the age of 15, he is no less a member of our family than Natalia, who came to our family at 7. Like, he's just as integral to us functioning as a family and feeling like a family as anybody else, which I, to be frank, didn't think was possible. And I think a part of that is just not knowing and not ever having experienced it. Like, I think it's just an assumption that I made in my own mind that if you get them while they're younger, of course they're going to feel like a part of your family, and it's going to be easier to integrate because they're younger, which I think a lot of times is why people look at just infants. Because if you get them when they're a baby, then they won't have any problems, right? Because they haven't experienced. But, we know differently than that now, that even in utero, there are things that can happen that can cause the traumas that you then have to deal with as a parent. But now that we've experienced it, we're obviously not at a point with 5 children to take additional kids right now, but it's something that we have talked about in the future, helping other older children who are in need. So
when the current older children go
when
off
the
to
current
college,
older children move out, then we'll think about it. So, but it's something that I joke all the time, but in all seriousness, like, I would love to have a house big enough that I could take 10 more. Like, I enjoy it. And if I could do it as my full-time job and just be their mom, if things were set up to be able to do that, there would be no greater joy for me than to be able to do that. But right now,
it's not
we have our
possible.
family. And it's good.
The unfortunate thing is with the current Utah foster system is stories like ours and Rue's. They aren't widely known. It's the kids who go into the foster homes and put holes in the walls and break the windows and smash the dishes. Those are the ones that everybody hears about.
Yeah.
So naturally there's an aversion to taking on teenagers because those are the stories that everybody tells. Nobody tells the stories about the teens who come and make a difference and grow and become adults who are
Amazing members of society.
yeah. It's the bad stories that everybody hears. And that's the sad thing with the teens in the foster care system.
Well, I don't know very many other teens that are in the foster care system, like know them really well. But as for me, finding a family who would actually take me in and help me and treat me like I was a real human being instead of something you use, then it really impacted my life in every way. Like, I would not be where I am right now if it wasn't for mom and dad. And I just would like to tell everyone, just do what you would feel best in your heart to do. If you feel it's right, then help somebody out. That's what I try to do. And I really thank mom and dad for doing that for me too. And it's really helped me feel a whole lot better about myself and helped me see other people's perspectives, and has just changed my life completely. I feel like a total different kid from when I came. So, yeah, I just encourage everybody to help each other out. We're all here to help.
I think the most amazing thing about fostering a teenager is specific to our experience, is honestly being able to parent a child who's your hero. To look at somebody who has overcome so much adversity and to have the opportunity to help change their future. It's amazing opportunity and definitely a huge responsibility. So it's good stuff.